Okay. Madam Chair, we are ready to begin.
Good afternoon and welcome. It's 5:31 and I am calling the November 2nd, 2021 meeting of the Historic Site Preservation Board to order. Please silence all cell phones. May we please have the roll call?
Yes, good evening, everyone. Member Rose? Member Rose, thank you.
Here.
Member Miller?
Here.
Member Hanson is absent. Member Rosenau?
Here.
Member Kaiser?
Here.
Member Nelson?
Present.
And Chair Huff?
Present.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. May we please have the staff report on the posting of the agenda?
Yes, the agenda for this meeting was posted for public review at the City Hall Bulletin Board on the west side of the Council Chamber and at the Planning Department counter for 6 p.m. on Thursday, October 28th, 2021.
Does the board have any revisions to the agenda? May I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Motion.
So moved.
I have a motion by Miller and is a second by
Steve Rose. Okay.
Steve Rose. Hey, is there any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 6-0. Okay, this time we're going to public comment. And this time has been set aside for members of the public to address the Historic Site Preservation Board on agenda items and items of general interest within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board. Although the Historic Site Preservation Board values your comments pursuant to the Brown Act, it generally cannot take any action on items that are not listed on the posted agenda. There will be 3 minutes assigned for each speaker. Testimony for public hearings will be taken at the time of the hearing. So anyone who has joined us today who wishes to speak on any item that is not a public hearing, this includes item 4A, the Bogert sculpture at City Hall. Now is the time to speak. Each person wishing to speak may have 3 minutes. Staff, has anyone signed up to speak today on any of these non-public hearing items that are on our agenda?
Madam Chair, there are people in the room today who do wish to speak on this item. There's at least one individual who is participating with us today by phone. As we were discussing, if you are able to, those of you who do have cameras or here are participating via video, you can raise your hand, and there's also a raise your hand feature here in Zoom under the header of reactions. So we will take everybody as we take orders on them, and then we'll pick up those people that are participating by iPhone. I will be helping you, Madam Chair, with keeping the time.
Okay, and so who is our first speaker?
It looks as though our first speaker would be Susan's iPhone. Susan, can you unmute yourself? You're still muted.
Got it. There we go.
Go ahead, please.
All right. I'm Susan Jacoy, and I'm a longtime board member of Desert Riders. And I want to comment on the staff report. The staff report ignores the history of City Hall itself. It is not just bricks and mortar. It is the core of the city's political culture. And Frank Bogart was one of the most well-known, accomplished, and respected figures in the history of the city. The City Council in 2012 could have specifically removed the statue from the historic designation as it did with landscape. Historic designation of a site should include a history of the cultural and political activities and significance of City Hall. The commission and dedication of the statue at City Hall by citizens is historic in itself. The consideration of possible removal of the statue would be accompanied by an historic resource assessment prepared by a qualified historic and art resource consultant. An historic resource assessment is the appropriate supporting documentation required to consider the statue, the artist, the historic content, Frank Bogart's many contributions to the city, the history of the city, and other issues before any decision on the merit of the statue can be made and before any action to remove or relocate the statue. The staff report, page 7, claims that the statue itself is not a historic resource and states that this finding is not subject to further evaluation. This unsubstantiated claim is not supported by historic resource assessment or any other documentation and completely ignores the Western culture of the city, Frank Bogart's historic contributions to the city and region, and the artist and his international acclaim. Historic resources, history, and the historic status of Frank Bogart have been dismissed without any supporting documentation, and as such is merely the opinion of city staff. And I certainly appreciate you letting me make my comments and your consideration of this matter. Thank you.
Susan, would you be kind enough to help me with your last name, please? You're muted.
Came up again, unmute. There you go. It's Jacoy, Jacoy.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your public comment.
Well, thank you.
Next, Madam Chair, is Mark Bragg. Mark, if you would unmute your microphone, please.
Does that work?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. People have the right to change their minds, but no one has the right to change history. That was the underlying founding premise of the Historic Site Preservation Board. The very existence of the HSPB is to protect the essential truth of history from being revised by people who don't care about the truth. And the revisionists have always been around to try to control the development of the future by lying about the past. The HSPB was created to stop that from happening. Some of the same people who helped create the historic district that is City Hall and its grounds have changed their minds and want to throw out the history you are here to protect. Those people have cost the city enormous amounts of taxpayer money. They have created a chasm dividing our citizens. They've created litigation that could cost the people of Palm Springs a lot of money and adverse publicity. And they've wasted an incredible amount of time. All of it based on lies and misrepresentations about who Frank Bogart really was. And I apologize for mispronouncing it. It's Bogart. Those of us who are committed to the preservation of the truth request that this board do its job and stop this madness. That's why you exist. To do otherwise would mean your service here is simply a waste of time. People still have the right to change their minds, but they don't have the right to change history. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bragg. Madam Chair, the next speaker is Carrie Allen. Carrie Allen, could you please unmute your mic, and you have 3 minutes. All right, there you go.
Whoops. Need to unmute again.
Unmute again. There you go.
In 1965, my husband joined Palm Springs Rotary Club, and he met Frank Bogart and his lovely friend, wonderful Rabbi Joe Horowitz. Bob would come home often telling me of the joking that went on in Rotary between Clarence Dolphin, one of the Black members, and Frank Bogart. They were always kidding each other. Who said that Frank Bogart was a racist? When I was on the Human Relations Commission, it was my job to investigate discrimination complaints, and Frank always supported my part in those cases. 1976, I served as president of Tiempo de los Niños, an auxiliary enabling pediatric wing, and Tiempo de los Niños Tower at Desert Regional Medical Center. We were hosting an annual half parade luncheon, about 500 guests. Frank was the master of ceremony. He played a joke on me by telling the audience that he adopted me from China as a small girl and brought me to the United States. He taught me how to speak English. He said that he was so proud of me at having graduated from UCLA with honors. What started to be a joke led to a wonderful friendship of over 40 years. He started calling me hijita, and I call him papacito. Later, I served 7 years in the planning commission, and he also had time to listen to my concerns. He always was a cowboy historian. In those days, Palm Springs had rodeo in the middle of our town. He was responsible for so many of the successes in our city. Over a year ago, I started hearing gossip regarding Frank. One woman told a large group of Rotarians that Frank was against women. He left Rotary when he was first women joined Rotary. That was an outright lie. I did not embarrass her by correcting her since we were in the middle of a Zoom function. The first women member of Palm Springs Rotary Club was Margie Tapp, a well-known realtor in Palm Springs. She and Frank were the best of friends. Frank was very fond of her son, and they were dinner guests at the Bogart home often. I called that woman that told the lie and asked her, "Where did you hear this?" She said she couldn't remember. It seems like gossip is the basis of the accusations all over Papacito. During 1990s, Palm Springs had a difficult time for our building industry. Papacito Frank involved building the AV Casino in Laughlin. My patients informed me that he was responsible for keeping them in their homes and putting the good food on their tables. No one ever thanked him for that. These are some of my memories of Papacito. When I was ignored in Bullocks and Saks and sat by the dirty dishes in better restaurants, he and his family welcomed me with encouragement and respect. And I truly say that what's been spread about Papacito are just false and not true. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Sue Lefebvre, are you here for this item?
Yes, I am here.
Please go ahead.
Thank you for letting me speak. I have known Frank through the Desert Riders, which I am currently still a member on the board. In maintaining the Western cowboy lifestyle in Palm Springs has always been important to me. The staff report is deficient. It completely ignores the historic accomplishments of Frank Bogart, the city's long-established Western culture, the historic context of Frank Bogart, and why the statue was placed at City Hall. Many of the early settlers, including Frank, were deeply rooted in Western culture. Palm Springs at one time had more than 20 stables and riding facilities. Frank Bogart's accomplishments span 75 years and include involvement with the El Mirador Hotel, Racket Club, Thunderbird Country Club, Chamber of Commerce, community events, Palm Springs Historical Society, Los Compadres, and many other institutions in the Coachella Valley, too numerous to list here. Frank Bogart's book, Palm Springs, First 100 Years, has been printed in 2 editions. He's been featured in numerous periodicals, newspaper articles, city-sponsored videos, press releases, and other publications. His contributions to the city of Palm Springs are unrivaled, and for that work, he was honored by a statue in front of City Hall. Section 8.05.01 PSMC clearly states that Class 1 criteria shall include resources that are associated the lives of persons who made meaningful contributions to local history and resources that exemplifies a particular period of history. The Bogart statue qualifies in this regard. Please don't try to erase our history and leave the statue as it is. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Lefebvre. Renee Brown, are you here to speak on this item? Would you like to unmute?
I certainly am.
Please go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, I was born and raised in Palm Springs, and the Western heritage is a really important part of my memories as being a child. Now that And that statue, that's what that statue represents, is our connection with our Western heritage. I hope everybody got a chance to read the article that was written about Frank Bogart and Palm Springs Alive. And I'd like to highlight one part where it was a quote from Viola Ortner. And what she basically said was, it had nothing to do with color. It had to do with the fact that for the first time, the Indians had the right to lease their land. And I know as a homeowner, if I were to have renters in my home and I decided to sell my home, I would be able to ask the renters to move. And that's exactly what happened. Because of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the tribe was only allowed to lease their land for 5 years. That changed in 1959. And that's actually, that change in the law is what precipitated people being displaced. Anyway, thank you very much for your time. And I would love to keep the memory of Palm Springs being a Western town alive. My grandchildren and my great-grandchildren have all seen the statue, and you know what's funny? Not one of them asked who the man was on top of the horse. They only noticed the horse. Anyway, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Renee. Doug Evans, would you like to speak on this item? Please unmute. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Ken. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the HSPB. I worked for the city for 26 proud years. I managed planning and helped start the historic preservation program during my time. Friends of Frank Bogart have submitted extensive comments. You have 300 letters that have been submitted to you that support the statute. We're concerned that the staff report doesn't address all the issues. It doesn't address the statute at all. In 2012, the city reevaluated the City Hall site and added everything, including all structures. You need an historic site assessment to evaluate what you're doing tonight and what you're being asked to consider. But first, I'd like to address the decision-making process the HSPB has been asked to consider tonight. In essence, you've been asked to make a preordained decision on a matter the City Council has decided while ignoring its own ordinances and state law. They are asking you to rubber stamp a decision based upon false information and without any analysis of the Frank Bogart statute. Just support removing it as if it has no historic value. We hope and trust that the HSPB sees through this noise, takes its role very seriously as the trusted advisors for the community when it comes to historic buildings, historic sites, historic works of art, and the very people who helped found this city. To take any action regarding the statute tonight in absence of a full historic resources assessment will result in the destruction of a significant historic resource. Staff report incorrectly tries to make the argument that the statue is not part of the historic site designation. The resolution adopted in 2002 included all ancillary structures. The only improvements that were excluded were the plants at City Hall. The proposed categorical exemption flies in the face of the city ordinances and state law. Clearly, the removal of a significant historic resource from a Class 1 historic site does not meet the definition recommended. It's a far cry from maintenance, repair, restoration, or rehabilitation, no matter how the staff tries to turn it to support what the City Council wants you to do. Removal is removal, and a Class 31 exemption does not apply. Such a determination must be supported by substantial evidence in the record. The staff report does not have that. The role Frank Bogart played in the community is not mentioned. The history behind the placement of the statue is absent from the report.
Mr. Evans, your 3 minutes is up. Please conclude.
I'll conclude with please do not rubber stamp a political decision that affects the Class 1 historic site and undermine all the good work the HSPB has done to preserve Palm Springs history. Thank you very much. Appreciate the morning there, Ken. You all have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Mr. Norm King, would you like to speak on this item? If so, please unmute yourself. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Sorry for the, oh, that's not going to work. I'll use my flashlight. Thanks very much for the time. I'm Norm King. I was city manager when Frank Bogert was mayor of Palm Springs in the 1980s. Aside from his immediate family, for 6 years, I spent more time with Frank. Our offices were adjacent and the door was always open than anyone else. I came to know Frank as one of the most open and inclusive individuals I've ever known. He was also an incredible character. He was most definitely not a bigot or a racist. Your role as a board is historic site preservation. As the Friends of Bogert have documented in our attachments to your agenda, the Frank Bogert statue is part of a Class 1 City Hall designation site. Removing the statue from Class 1 designation is not a procedural issue, as portrayed on tonight's agenda by the staff, and would require other actions and findings by the board. The effort to remove the statue is based on an unfounded and scandalous report about Frank, which has no author and which has been discredited. The city refuses to identify the author of the report. It was not city staff. It appears that the effort to remove the statue is an attempt to place responsibility for the Section 14 relocations on Frank Bogert. This ignores the historical record, which shows that had not the tribal council and the members of the tribe, who understandably wanted to be able to earn income from their newly allocated land and from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and for that matter, from the Riverside County Health Department, all of which urged Section 14 removals. Had they not done this, the city would not have been involved, period. The Bogert statue is unquestionably of significant historical, artistic interest and value. The Preservation Board would be delinquent in its mission if you did not protect this important part of Palm Springs history. Approving the removal of the statue without ensuring that it will be relocated to a safe, prominent, and acceptable location would be contrary to the mission of the Historic Site Preservation Board and lead to the destruction rather than the preservation of the history of Palm Springs. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. King. Mark Temple, are you here to speak on this item? If so, please unmute. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Ken, and members. Appreciate your time and efforts and working on all the stuff that you guys do. I moved to Palm Springs in 1977, and it was probably around 1980 I met Frank Bogert. He was 70 years old at the time, so I probably knew him from 70 to 99, about the third part of the end of, portion of his life. I considered him a good friend, and he was an extraordinary man. And then you kind of think about civil service. So I'm not sure, if he was involved in civil service 50 years, maybe 60 years, because, 40 through, the mid 90s. I'm sure there have been many boards and committees he was on, obviously mayor, city council. And these were all unpaid positions until I think the 1980s. I mean, I think it was only somewhere in the 80s that the mayor, I think they started to get $26,000 a year. Frank said, gee, I'm getting $500 a week. This is pretty good stuff. So to think that he worked so long and hard, I mean, he is truly a civil servant more than anybody I can think of. I mean, not only Palm Springs, but I mean, it could be the state. And then the last thing I just kind of go back to again is the Desert Sun. They have the article every week. Thank you for the memories about Palm Springs and the history. And if you go back through all of them, I mean, Frank's probably in about a third of them because he was there and part of it and so much. So I really think he does have an extraordinary, effect on Palm Springs and a positive. And, I hope that's just taken in consideration with all the issues and everything that is in front of everybody here. So thank you for your time and appreciate it, and good night.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Temple.
Yeah,
David-
absolutely.
David Christian, are you here to speak on this item? If so, please unmute. You have 3 minutes.
Tonight, the words and wisdom of our colleague.
There, I think I'm in.
You are. Go ahead, please.
Okay, my name is David Christian. I've been an architect and resident of Palm Springs for over 50 years. And during that time, I've naturally been involved with more than a few of the Palm Springs Class 1 historic sites. So I know the seriousness of what the HSPB fulfills, the seriousness with which the HSPB fulfills the role of protecting these important sites that reflect the remarkable history of our unique hometown. But the entire premise of the HSPB is completely dependent upon the accuracy of the historical records. And there can be no historic designations without knowing the story that led to that designation. And essentially, every Class 1 designated here, Class 1 site designated here, was selected because of all the events that led up to that designation. And those events are part and parcel of the history of Palm Springs from the time when only the Cahilla band of Aguacalientes were living here, and going on through the formative years of certainly the first 3/4 of the 20th century. Palm Springs has always been a very special place with a rich and fascinating tale to tell. The long-term residents have great pride in their town and love to pass that history on to visitors so that they may know how this place came to be. And part of that story is certainly represented by the Class 1 sites that have been preserved through the efforts of the Historic Site Preservation Board. So in my eyes, the role of the HSPB should not be compromised by attempts to change our known history. And further, the HSPB not only has the role of protecting these properties we hold most dear, but the HSPB really needs to be a custodian of the real history of Palm Springs, and especially the history of one of our most important founders. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Christian. Betsy, is it Sichanti? If you're here to speak on this item, would you please unmute, and you have 3 minutes? Am I pronouncing your last name correctly? You haven't, you have to unmute yet, please. There you go.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, this caught me off guard. I wasn't preparing anything, but my husband and I moved here about 9 years ago, started out snowbirding, and have now bought a place here in Palm Desert. And I have ridden with the Desert, I ride with the Desert Riders, I'm a member. And part of the interest in living here was the unique history that Frank Bogart was a part of. I mean, there was so much history that he was involved with just building this city up. I'm not going to go into details, but I strongly am supportive of keeping the Frank Bogart statue where it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sachari. We have a person here with an iPhone. I don't have your identification, but the person who is here as an iPhone, could you please unmute, and you have 3 minutes to make your public comment.
I don't know if it's me, but if it's me, this is Neki Bogart.
Yes, it's you. I'm sorry, what was your name? I missed it.
I am Neki Bogart.
Hi, Nikki. Go ahead, please.
Okay. I thank you for the opportunity. And my only concern with the decision that the commission may take is that they are not taking in consideration the importance of the sculpture, the artists that work on the statue. He is an acclaimed artist, and in doing what they propose to do, they'll be damaging his legacy as a sculptor of international renown. He has shown not only in Mexico, but here in the States, in various places. He has shown in Rome, in Paris, and many other places. So I really hope and pledge that you think on the artist before you make a decision. And in the culture that the statue represents, beyond whatever they think, the Western way of life in Palm Springs is what made us what we are now. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much, Nikki.
And Mr. Lyon, I want to correct the name. It's not Nikki, it's Nagy, Negie, Mrs. Nagy Bogert.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
We have a person here. The identification is P. Albani Bergio. If you're here to speak on this item, please unmute yourself. You have 3 minutes.
Sorry about that. I'm not actually here to speak.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. We have Sean Jones, who is here, I believe, to speak. Would you please unmute? And you have 3 minutes.
I have no comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Is there anyone here with us that is still wanting to speak on this item that I have not called? Mr. Stiles, are you here to speak on this item? Mr. Stiles, would you like to speak on this item? You're unmuted. John, would you like to speak on this item?
Mr. Lyon, I see that Susan Smith would like to speak.
Okay. I'm going to go on then. John, if you do want to speak, we'll come back to you. Susan Smith, would you like to unmute and provide your public comment? You have 3 minutes.
Good evening, board members. I really appreciate your taking consideration of this matter. I did forward earlier today to Mr. Lyon a very long letter to help you better understand the history of Palm Springs back in the period of Section 14 development. And I also included the Friends of Frank Bogert rebuttal to the HRC report. And again, I would ask that you kindly take this matter under advisement in your closed session and do read the rebuttal because it's full of information. And also, I mentioned that Nagy Bogert, who just spoke to you, is the widow of Frank Bogert. And a few weeks ago, she invited me to her lovely home. And I was just amazed at her numerous albums full of photos of many presidents of the United States who Frank Bogert welcomed to the city. And I think that he deserves the memorial to remain where it is. He helped develop the airport, the convention center. He worked on the tram, the tramway project, and he has initiated equestrian and hiking trails throughout the city. There's so many things that he did over a period of 75 years of service, and it's only fair and it's only just to simply leave the memorial, the Bogert Memorial, where it is. And I appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Do we have anybody else here wishing to speak on public comment at this time? Anybody else wishing to speak on public comment?
Those who may have just joined the meeting, anyone wishing to speak on agenda item 4A, the Frank Bogert sculpture, now is the time to make your comments. Please use the raise hand feature so we can recognize you.
I see we have Dottie Wilder. Dottie, go ahead and unmute, and you have 3 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Hi. Yes, I didn't hear what went on before, so I'll make my comment about Frank's statue. I am curious if who has the right to move it if it was purchased with private donations and is not owned by the city. So that's my question, and it was done before they had an art commission. So I'd just like to know who actually has the right to decide to move that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wilder. Anybody else wishing to speak during public comment? Okay, I believe that's it, Madam Chair. We have everybody that wishes to speak has apparently spoken. So thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, thank you. So seeing no additional speakers, we will proceed to agenda item 1A. And we have 3 sets of meeting minutes on the consent agenda. And I will ask for any corrections on each set of minutes, and then we will take one vote on all 3 sets of minutes. So to begin, are there any corrections on the minutes of the meeting of August 26? Mr. Miller?
Yes, I would just note that under the roll call, you, Catherine, are listed there, but you're also listed under the absent. And I believe at that meeting you were absent, and Vice Chair Nelson chaired the meeting, if I recall.
Yeah,
So that would just be
correct.
Yeah.
That's a correction. Okay, any other corrections to the minutes of August 26? Okay, now are there any corrections on the minutes of September 14? Any corrections? Oh, nope. Okay, very good. So how about September 29? Mr. Nelson?
Yeah, I would like the record to reflect that for the minutes of September 29, second page, second to last paragraph, the last sentence says, Member Nelson suggested an amendment that the Police Officers Association identify a site for the mural to be relocated. Part of my suggestion at that time was a site for the mural to be relocated at a future date, not at the present time that we were talking about. So I would like the record to be changed to reflect that I meant at a future date.
At a future date.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Are there any other corrections to September 29 minutes? Okay. So very good. Now may I have a motion to accept all 3 sets of minutes with the corrections that have been stated here? Motion.
So moved.
Okay, Mr. Rosenau, second by Mr. Miller. Okay, very good. And so is there any more discussion about the minutes? All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion passes 6-0. Let us proceed to agenda item 2A, public hearings. This is an application by Joseph Mantello and Paul Marlowe, owners for historic designation of the Donald Wechsler residence located at 1272 East Verbena Drive. May we please have a staff report?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. As noted in your staff report, this particular application was submitted by the homeowners, Joseph Mantello and Paul Marlowe. The report was prepared by the Palm Springs Preservation Foundation by Stephen Kaline. As noted on page 2, the Wechsler dwelling was designed in 1954 by master architect Donald Wechsler as his family home. It's a noteworthy example of the early architectural work of Wechsler, reflecting the mid-20th century period of architectural development in Palm Springs. The period of significance for the site is identified as being from 1954 to 1989, the period during which the Wechsler family resided at the property. The property has been evaluated against the criteria for historic designation beginning on page 3 of your staff report. And it is noted on the top of page 4 that the criterion 2, criterion 3, criterion 4, and criterion 5 are the items under which this particular property possesses historic significance. I'm not going to go into all of the detail at this time because of the length of our meeting tonight, but I also want to further discuss, beginning on page 5 of your staff report, the analysis of integrity. The analysis of integrity, as you know, includes location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. And as noted in the Historic Resources report, this home does possess significant architectural and historic integrity. As noted in the Historic Resources report, the building had been originally designed by Mr. Wechsler and then had an addition made onto the home. I believe it was in 1968 as his family grew and needed more space to accommodate the family's needs. On page 7 is an identification from the report of the defining historic characteristics of the report. And then below that are the non-contributing elements. I would note that we've identified that the swimming pool and spa, from a staff opinion, is not a defining characteristic because it is not the original pool, even though it is in the original location. The opened carport, the mature palms, Aleppo pines, fun aluminum can lights, the 1968 bedroom wing addition are all character defining features of this home. So at this time, staff is recommending that the board make a recommendation to City Council for Class 1 historic designation of this property. Madam Chair, this is a public hearing item and staff is available to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
So does the board have any questions for staff to begin with? Any questions of staff? Okay, so seeing no further questions of staff, I will open the public hearing. Does the applicant or representative wish to speak?
Stephen Kalon, who is representing the owners, Madam Chair, is here to speak on behalf of the owners.
Okay, so welcome, Mr. Kalon. So is there anything that you'd like to tell us more about the application beyond your excellent report? You have 10 minutes to present and 2 minutes of a rebuttal if desired after any other public comments. So welcome.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I don't know why the picture's not working, but I don't really have a lot to offer. The owners couldn't be here tonight, but they wanted to let me to extend that they really support this enthusiastically. So other than the report and then what Mr. Lyon has already offered, I don't have a lot of other information. You know, it's always interesting to see what an architect does for his own home. And this is a great example with, you know, superior integrity and a beautiful house. So I'm really just here to answer questions if you do have any.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak in public comment on this item? If so, please state your name. Anyone wishing to speak? Okay, doesn't look like it. So seeing no further speakers at this time, I will close the public hearing. So now the action is with the board. Are there any further comments or questions or discussion about this item? Mr. Rosenau?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really appreciate Mr. Keelan's report.
I've been fortunate to visit this house several times over the last decade or so, and it's always one of my favorites in town. It's so simple, yet Mr. Wechsler was able to add on as needed when his family expanded. So I think it really documents the early part of his career, and I'm very much in favor of this application. Thank you.
Very good. Any other, Mr. Nelson?
Yeah, just wanted to thank Mr. Keelan and PSPF for one of the cleanest, most easy to read historic designation reports ever. It was just flowed so beautifully, and all the information was there. The photos were excellent, and I think Don would be very, very proud of it. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Mr. Rose?
You need to unmute your mic.
I agree that Mr. Keelan's report was really fabulous and a joy to read. So now, Mr. Rose.
Thank you.
Congrats to Mr. Keelan and PSPF. You know, I'm the newest kid on this block, and I just would like to say how thrilled I am to be a part of this. This nomination is why we do this, and I'm proud to support it.
Excellent. Any further comments from anyone? Okay, seeing no further discussion, may I have a motion, please?
Yes, I move to recommend to the City Council designation of this house for Class 1 nomination.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Rose and a second by Mr. Rosen now. Is there any further discussion? Mr. Lyon?
May I just ask the maker of the motion, are you making the motion based on the findings in the staff report?
I am.
Thank you.
So then you accept the staff report?
Completely.
Okay, I do too. So, okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? Okay, so motion passes 6-0. Thank you very much. So moving on to unfinished business, there is no unfinished business. So let's proceed to new business, which is agenda item 4A. This is the City of Palm Springs requesting a certificate of appropriateness for alterations to the Palm Springs City Hall, a Class 1 landmark historic site located 3200 East Talkwitz. May we please have a staff report?
Yes, Mr. Priest, did you want to precede my staff report with any comments?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Lyon. Madam Chair, members of the board, it's a pleasure being with you this evening. Jim Priest, Palm Springs City's Attorney's Office. I just wanted to give a brief statement before Mr. Lyon gets to the substance of his staff report. We've heard from a number of speakers this evening, and emotions are strong regarding Mayor Bogert these days. That said, I would like to advise the board this evening that you are deciding, and only deciding, whether to issue a certificate of appropriateness for the removal of the Mayor Bogert statue from the City Hall site. You are not making a decision about Mayor Bogert, the person, or any of his actions. Pursuant to the municipal code, you must make certain conformity findings to issue the certificate as outlined on pages 6 through 8 of the staff report. And I'm sure Mr. Lyon will get into more of that as he presents. If you determine that you can make these findings, you may issue the certificate. The staff report recommends issuance of the certificate and contains facts and draft findings to that end. On the other hand, if you determine you cannot make these findings, then you do not issue the certificate. That's all I had to say this evening, Madam Chair. I'll yield the rest of my time back to Mr. Lyon.
Okay, Mr. Lyon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As noted in your staff report, the City Council has determined that it wishes to proceed with the process required to remove the statue of Frank Bogert that is in front of City Hall. City Hall was designated a Class 1 Landmark Historic Site on October 2nd, 1996. Although the statue, which was installed in 1989, is not a part of the defining. Pardon? Not a part of the defining historic characteristics of the site, its removal constitutes an alteration to the Class 1 historic site and thus requires consideration of a certificate of appropriateness. As noted also in the background, the City Hall was designed by the modernist architectural style in a collaborative effort of Albert Frey, John Porter Clark, and Robson Chambers, and was constructed between 1952 and 1956 in terms of its portions that do front Tockwitz Canyon Way and the L-shaped parcel that moves off to the north. The building's volume and massing reflect the modernist tenet form follows function, in which the various elements of the council chamber, for example, the council chamber, are distinctly different from the administrative offices, reflecting the different functional uses within those spaces. In 2012, the council amended the historic designation to include the open space surrounding the building as a character defining feature, noting the historic designation is hereby amended to include the structures, features, and land in that portion of the APN and bounded by the north edge of the north parking lot, the curb edges along Civic Drive, Tockwitz Canyon Way, and El Cielo Road, excepting the landscape and plants therein. As we noted in the staff report, while the original and designating resolutions do not mention a period of significance, staff would assert that the period of significance is represented by the post-World War II period 1945 to 1969, as defined in the citywide historic resource context statement, The additions from 1972, comprising the Emergency Operations Center and the Development Services area in 1984, are more utilitarian in their design and composition and do not possess the same architectural or historic significance of the earlier portions of the building. On the bottom of page 2 of your staff report, we have identified what staff believes are the following character defining features of the site. And they conclude the modernist architecture of the building, the asymmetrical composition of the primary facade facing Tockwitz Canyon Way, the configuration and shape of the council chamber, including the round concrete entry porch, the ribbon windows along the administrative wing, including the sunscreens or brise soleil that face Tockwitz Canyon. Also, the pigmented concrete block, which represent common mass-produced materials, the raised plinth upon which the building is set, the covered entry area with the rectilinear roof with the round opening, clad in corrugated metal and fiberglass in the aqua blue ceiling plane, and the open space surrounding the building as defined above. The non-defining character elements are the landscape, the parking lots, the 72 and 84 additions. On page 4 of your staff report are some historic images. They were accredited by Julia Schulman, which show what the building looked like from its frontage views during its period of significance in the 1950s and 60s. And then also on page 5 is an image which shows the statue under consideration and its location relative to the front open space of City Hall. The analysis of this particular certificate of appropriateness begins on page 6 of your staff report. And I'm going to do a quick PowerPoint presentation and share my screen, if I may, for a moment, and give you a brief summary on this. Let's see if I can make this work for you. Can you see my screen?
No, we can't.
Do you now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this first slide is an image of the Palm Springs City Hall. The historic significance is based on it's a notable example of civic architecture from the mid-20th century period, designed by notable architects Clark, Frey, and Chambers. Period of significance, as I mentioned, 1945 to 1969. Designated by City Council in 96, expanded in 2012. There is the character defining features, which I mentioned earlier. The historic designation in 2012, as I mentioned, expanded the character defining features to include the site. Modifications to the landscape was exempted, and it clarified that the open space was character defining. The certificate of appropriateness is what I want to talk to you about next, and these are the findings that you need to make in order to make a certificate of appropriateness. First, that the proposed alteration does not significantly impact or materially impair the character defining features of the historic resources listed in the resolution, or where a character defining feature may be impacted, the proposed alteration minimizes that impact as much as possible. On page 6 of your staff report, we have provided some of staff's analysis of the property and the action for you. We've noted that the, excuse me, I've mentioned already the materials that make up the City Hall and the open space and the Bogert statue, which is located in it. There is no mention of the Bogert statue in the analysis of the site that was conducted in the 2012 amended designation. The statue was installed in 1989, and thus it does not reflect the period of significance of the building and has no historic association with the building's architecture or the architects credited with its design. Therefore, staff believes that it can be reasonably concluded that the statue is not a character-defining feature of City Hall, nor does it contribute to its historic significance. Removal of the statue will not materially impair the historic character-defining features of the site, nor diminish its historic significance. Criterion 2, that the proposed alteration will assist in restoring the historic resource to its original appearance where applicable, or will substantially aid in its preservation or enhancement as a historic resource. On page 7 of your staff report, we have provided analysis of this question under criterion 2, noting that the open space in front of City Hall was originally designed with landscapes, turf, ground cover, and 2 parking lots. The Bogert statue is located in this landscaped, quote unquote, front yard. The removal of the statue will restore the open space in front of City Hall to its original open condition. Removal of the statue, thank you. Removal of the statue will restore the site more closely to resemble the site's condition during its period of significance. And finally, the removal will result in a more unobstructed view of the front facade of City Hall. I'd like to provide, as in your staff report on page 7, discussion about the significance of views. In the 2012 staff report, the report notes that monuments, statues, and other decorative elements and trees were placed in front of the low-rise buildings. These created a more complicated setting. Indeed, these alterations that were made prior to the historic designation of the site complicated and impaired the unobstructed view of City Hall as viewed from the public street. The report goes on to conclude that the accumulation of these objects demonstrated that more than views of the building were important to the community. This may have been the general community sentiment prior to the historic designation. However, the initiative that started in 2010 to designate the entire site as historically significant arose from proposed alterations that would have added rows of parked cars across the front of City Hall, thereby obscuring further the clear views of the building from the street. Clearly, after its historic designation, the community's awareness of the importance of the open, unobstructed views of the front of City Hall grew. It was the threat of further obscuring these open views of the front of City Hall that prompted the City Council to expand and clarify that the significance of the site from a historic perspective lay not only in the building itself, but also in the open space around it that allowed uninterrupted views of the City Hall from the public street. Thus, removal of the statue will substantially aid in enhancing the site as a historic resource, and therefore, criterion 2 findings can be affirmatively met. Number 3, that any additions to the historic resource are consistent with the massing, proportions, material, and finishes of the existing historic resource. And 1, may be distinguished from the existing historic resource as may be appropriate, or 2, are indistinguishable from the historic resource as may be appropriate, and where such alterations are clearly documented in the city's archival file as being non-original to the historic resource. On page 8 of your staff report, we have considered this particular criterion. The proposed removal of the statue is not an addition. Moreover, the removal of the statue will not impact the massing, proportions, materials, or finishes of the City Hall building. Therefore, staff believes this finding can also be affirmatively met. And lastly, that in cases of federal funds being utilized in financing of proposed alterations, that the alterations are consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. And as noted on page 8, there are no federal funds involved in the proposed project. Therefore, this finding is not applicable. Staff is therefore recommending approval of a certificate of appropriateness for the possible removal of the Bogert statue. Our CEQA analysis is continued on pages 9 and 10. And I will conclude by stating, as we said before, that the statue is not a character defining feature of the building or the site. It does not represent or reflect the period of significance when the City Hall was designated and built. The statue itself does not meet the definition of a historic resource in the city's historic resource ordinance. Its removal will enhance the visibility of the front of City Hall and assist in returning the appearance of City Hall to the way it appeared during its period of significance shortly after its completion of the primary additions in 1965. Staff recommends a certificate of appropriateness for the proposed removal of the statue. I'm going to finish sharing my screen if I can figure out how to do so.
It's already gone, Mr. Lyons.
And I am here to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much for providing all that information for us. And so now it's time for the board to ask questions of the staff or council. And so if I may, I have two questions that I would like to ask of staff and council. And I'm going to focus on the sculpture. The sculpture is by internationally known artist Raimundo Cobo Reyes, who is alive and he lives in Mexico City. So my first question is, has the city staff reviewed the Visual Arts Rights Act of 1990 that prevents a modification or alteration of artwork? I note that VARA does not protect location of a site-specific work, but VARA allows artwork to be relocated as long as the move does not alter or modify the artwork. I bring this up because if the sculpture is removed and separated from the group of boulders that the horse and rider are mounted upon, it would change the integrity of the artwork. I strongly believe, as an art expert, that it was the artist's intention to place the sculpture precisely on an outcropping of rocks, like a cowboy riding his horse on a rocky ridge, in our mountains. Like riding on the Lickin Trail, for example. So the boulders, provide that foundation of a natural Western setting that I believe is integral to the artwork. So my question being, do we need to preserve the integrity of the artwork and the moral rights of the artist? And then my second question, I'll be brief, is I understand that the artwork was accessioned into the City of Palm Springs' public art collection. And I certainly understand that the Public Art Commission is authorized to relocate artworks in the collection and reinterpret them. I know that they can do that. But I also understand that the artwork was donated to the city by private individuals. It was donated to the city in public trust. So this is an ethical question I have. So regarding ethics, I believe it is vitally important to protect artistic property and ensure public access. It is our responsibility to serve the public trust by keeping and caring for the artwork on behalf of our community. We need to preserve and interpret the art for our future generations to continue to study. So those are my two questions: the Visual Artists' Rights Act and the fact that this sculpture is part of the public art collection. So, Mr. Priest, do you have a comment about the Visual Artists' Rights Act?
Certainly, Madam Chair, members of the board. Our office has looked into this issue, both under the Visual Artists' Rights Act, which is the federal law, and the corresponding California Art Preservation Act, which is CAPA, the state equivalent. After consulting both of those laws, we believe that if the statue is carefully removed and stored, then that would still meet the requirements of VARA and CAPA. There would be no defacement, alteration, mutilation, or any of the other prohibitions in those statutes. In addition, as you noted, Madam Chair, VARA does not provide for any rights of location in a particular place in the city. And our reading of the law is that it does provide or does allow for careful removal and storage of the statue. As for it being donated in public trust and how the statue might ultimately be, used in the future, I can't speak to that. Staff may have some information on that.
Thank you. So I'd like to give the opportunity to other board members to ask questions. I have a few more, but I would like other people to speak. So who would like to ask a question or comment? Mr. Nelson?
Yeah, it's just a disclosure and a comment. Firstly, the disclosure, just for the record, that my mother knew Frank Bogert and worked with the Palm Springs Historical Society to design a second edition of his book, at which time I was fortunate enough to meet him, and he was extremely gregarious and down to earth. My comment is, it concerns me that the HSPB is being enrolled to opine on a highly politicized issue around an artifact that by city staff on admission is not considered historic. And yet, at the same time, this is a piece of public art by a famous sculptor. So consequentially, it would appear logical that the Art Commission, rather than the HSPB, should make any determination on the relocation and or replacement of statues. Therefore, in good conscience, I must abstain from voting on this particular issue tonight. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Mr. Rosenau?
Sort of to piggyback on Jade's comments as well as Mr. Evans's comments, who spoke during public comment. It's sort of unfortunate that we're, the HSPB and other boards and commissions are sort of cleaning up after the city council has made a decision, a very public decision as well. In reading the report and as well as the rebuttals that we received as board members from various attorneys and whatnot, I'm worried. During the 2012 designation, when we said that it was the entire site excluding the landscaping, which is originally designed by Garrett Ekbo, by the way, so that should have actually probably been included because he is a famous landscape architect. Given that as it's made, the statue was not excluded during that decision, and so I think that we need much more clear determination. I don't think this should fall under a class 31 exemption under CEQA determination, because this is clearly a part of the entire site. I feel very uncomfortable just granting removal. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Rose? You need to unmute. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I just can't seem to figure it out. I'm really concerned with a lot of the issues that were raised tonight. And, I, like most members of this board, really take my responsibility seriously here. And I think we're acting here without a complete record. I really do. I have been incredibly complimentary of the staff and continue to be. I think Ken does an amazing job. The staff is brilliant. But honestly, this report feels like a decision in search of reasoning instead of the other way. I feel like it is not a reasoned proposal by the staff. It feels like there was already a decision made and they've asked the staff to come up with a decision, a basis for it. Like, the statute really blocks the view. I mean, come on. Look, I think that we need to develop the record more and, possible to, evaluate whether we can issue a certificate without a complete record. I think that there's been some great points brought up that maybe it's the Art Commission's responsibility, but we certainly need the staff to prepare a historic resource assessment and, if necessary, an environmental impact report. But the record is completely incomplete as far as I'm concerned. And I move that we direct the staff to have a more complete record before we vote on this. I'm very, very concerned that this was kicked to us to make a decision with an incomplete record, and it could be even inappropriate for us to do so. It concerns the heck out of me.
Understand. Other comments from our board, Mr. Kaiser?
Okay. I've only been here for 6 years, so I don't have all the history of Frank Bogart. Where the statue is, if it's in front of City Hall, doesn't make a great impact on me. But I think what could be very much more palatable to the whole community is it to present another scenario of where this statue would be, how it would be honored, and how we would honor Frank Bogart. So we can sort of see not just the beginning and the taking apart, but the final end. And I think that that would also help the friends of Frank Bogart see that he would be honored appropriately, and it may make this a win-win situation for everyone involved.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Miller?
Yes. This is a very passionate issue, obviously, as many people have noted. And we have seen so much and heard so much information regarding the history of Frank Bogart tonight and leading up to this hearing. It is apparent that he did a lot for the city of Palm Springs and its history, and he is forever a part of that history, whether there's a statue in front of City Hall or not. I'm of the mind, somewhat different than some of the other board members that have spoken, in that our charge tonight is relatively simple, and we are only tasked as to whether or not the removal or relocation of the statue from City Hall property is adversely affecting the historic resource that is City Hall. And I'm not seeing anything that tells me that the removal of the statue would be adversely affecting the historic resource of City Hall. The heated debate and politics of the situation, I think, is confusing the simplicity of this issue. The fact that the Historic Preservation Board is getting this is simply a sequence of requirements that needs to effectuate the potential removal of the statue. We do know, of course, what the City Council has done, but that's why this is in front of us. The action tonight by the Historic Board is not the end all, and it still would need to go to the Arts Commission. It's just one cog in a number of issues that need to be dealt with if the statue is going to be removed. So I feel a little bit more comfortable at this point than some of the other board members. I do respect those board members, and I certainly mean no disrespect to Frank Bogart or his history in the city of Palm Springs. But I am ready to vote on this tonight if any other board members are willing to do so.
Any other comments? Mr. Rose?
I appreciate what Mr. Miller said, and thank you for that. You know, I did make a motion that we get a more complete record. I as a board member, and it sounds like Mr. Rosenau as well, would feel more comfortable about having a more complete record, having a real historic resource assessment done. And, you know, I don't see how more information to help us make a decision would hurt at all. So I've made a motion and I'm wondering if there's a second.
Mr. Rosenau.
I will agree with Mr. Rose, and if that is a motion that can be made, I will second it.
Okay, so is there any?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
May I ask a question? Is
Certainly.
that to continue this item until the next HSPB meeting on December the 7th?
Yes, until we get a more complete record and get the assessment report done. If it can be done by then, that would be fantastic.
So noted that this would be continuing the item to December the 7th.
Okay. I agree that we need a full evaluation of the sculpture, the artist, and the historical significance. I agree we need more information about the artist, the artwork, in order to make a decision. I feel that the sculpture is within an historical context that was designated in 2012 by the City Council. The sculpture was not omitted as landscaping was omitted. So that bothers me. And the sculpture was placed in the open space, leaving, surrounding open space in front of the City Hall. And the sculpture is an addition within the open space, but it's distinguished from the building. It's very separate. There is plenty of open space around that surrounds it. It's wide open. So because this was designated in 2012, I have a hard time supporting its removal or relocation myself.
Can I call for the question?
Mr. Lyon?
I just want to make a couple of clarifications.
Yes.
In the staff report, we identified that the statue itself was not historic. And that comes from Municipal Code 8.05 and the definition of a historic resource. A historic resource means any site, structure, building, or object not located on tribal trust or allotted trust land, which has been designated a Class 1 or Class 2 status, or identified as a contributing resource within a city council designated historic district. Our purpose and identification that the statue itself is not a historic resource is based on that definition. Also, I would also make note of the question before you is, again, not around the significance of the statue, the importance of the statue, or its artistic value, but rather, does its removal materially impair the historic resource, which is City Hall and the City Hall site? The question is, does its removal materially impair the historic resource, which is City Hall and its site? And that's where staff made the assertion that removing it does not materially impair the historic resource. And the last thing I would ask is, if Mr. Rose, would you be able to clarify more or further for us so that we can pursue this appropriately for you, if that's the direction that the board wishes to take? What information can we provide which would help you make a decision?
Well, I would like to see a historic assessment report. I don't understand any factual basis on the staff's conclusions.
Okay.
So we have a motion.
Wait, I mean, honestly, what's the problem with getting more information for the board before we make a critical decision that it seems to be everyone in town's hair's on fire on? Let's get more information and move slowly and smartly and ethically and make sure that we have the right to do this. I'm concerned, and I feel like the board members should be as well.
Okay, any other discussion or comments? Mr. Nelson?
Yes, I would just like to concur with Madam Chair's latest comments, and also just kind of put this out there because there does seem to be a lot of confusion, and maybe in the further evaluation that's conducted by staff, if we hear this in December, maybe an expert can be consulted with regard to the following. It feels like to me that the period of significance of City Hall as a historic resource should be ongoing in terms of cultural and socioeconomic significance.
Yes.
I feel like a statue that is honoring a historic figure who was part of City Hall and part of the history of Palm Springs should be evaluated as part of the significant period. So I guess there's some question about the period of significance. And because it's a city hall where work is conducted daily to further the interest of the city, to further, planning and historic sites and, human rights and everything, why does the period of significance have to be just this period that's architectural? Because there's so much more to historic site preservation than just the period of significance of the building and the architect. And I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, so Mr. Rose, you got to do your unmute again.
Sorry, I know that Mr. Nelson has recused himself from the original motion, but because he has added his opinions about the current motion, may I ask Mr. Nelson to whether will be able to vote on my pending motion, please.
The reason for recusal still stands, as Mr. Nelson indicated in the record. So if you recuse yourself at the beginning, you are excluded from future votes on this item.
But this is a different motion.
Regardless, he recused himself.
What was it? Was it recusal or abstention?
It was an abstention.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, what I'm so sorry. What was there a legally required or an optional recusal done, or was there just an abstention? I thought I'd heard an abstention, which an abstention, that was just for that motion. That could be a different direction for a new motion.
I never made a recusal on this matter. I simply said at the beginning, I was abstaining from voting on this particular item tonight.
You can reverse that on a different motion if you'd like to change your mind on that.
Yes, are you abstaining from my motion to get more information?
I stated at the beginning of the meeting, I was abstaining from voting on anything tonight.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Nelson. And so we have a motion on the floor made by Mr. Rose requesting a historic resource assessment. We have a second by Mr. Rosenau. And is there any more discussion before we call for the vote? Any more comments from anybody? Okay, so all those in favor of the motion to request a historic resource assessment and seconded by Eric Rosenau, All in favor of that request and motion, please say aye.
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 Okay, any opposed?
Somebody voting no, please.
Okay, so we have, and Mr. Nelson is not voting. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 4 in favor and 1 opposed. Okay. We're clear for the record. Thank you for your participation. So now let's move on. Let us proceed to new business, which is, let's see, we are now going to 4C. Get my papers.
Madam Chair.
4B, yes. Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I will be making the following disclosure that I wrote a historic resources assessment for the architect, who is the representative of the applicant on this particular item. So I will be turning off my camera and muting myself and not participating in this particular item. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nelson. So we're proceeding to new business agenda item 4B, a review for a potential redesignation of a class 4 site to a class 1 or 2 historic resource initiated by an application by Mark W. Daniels on behalf of the owner requesting approval to demolish the dwelling located at 217 East Ocotillo Avenue. May we please have a staff report?
Yes, certainly, Madam Chair. And I do want to just make a correction for the record that my staff report is an error. Mr. Daniels is not the owner, but rather a representative for the owner.
Mhm.
So as noted in your staff report, the property owner is requesting approval to demolish a single-family dwelling built in 1937. By virtue of its date, it is a class 4 historic site, and pursuant to your historic preservation ordinance requires action by the board, either to take action to stay the demolition and initiate proceedings to seek designation of a class 1 or class 2 site, or to take no action and allow the demolition to proceed. I will note that the applicant, is not seeking historic designation of the site at this time. The analysis of this project is beginning on page 4 of your staff report, in which we're looking for how does this particular property and dwelling meet or not meet the criteria for potential designation. So we've evaluated it against the 7 criteria beginning on page 4. Noting particularly under criterion 2, there was some discussion about individuals in the historic resources report. Helen McCullum, who was not associated with early pioneer Judge John McCullum. There were several other subsequent owners who are identified, none of whom were identified as having any significance associated with the history of the city. Criterion 3 is evaluating it relative to a period of significance in city history. It's noted that the home was built in the 1930s in a tract that was subdivided in the 1920s. Although the home is a typical modest type dwelling from the 1930s, it's undergone numerous alterations, and staff believes that it does not stand as a noteworthy example of the period of the 1930s. Looking at it relative to construction, we identified that it is a conventional frame and stucco dwelling with a clay tile roof. There are not any factors about it that we could identify that were particularly distinctive or noteworthy that would cause it to be eligible under this criteria. The next one is whether or not it possesses historic significance based on a builder or architect. It's noted on the top of page 5 of your staff report that Charles Chamberlain was credited as the general contractor who built this particular structure. Chamberlain came to Palm Springs in the 1920s and is recognized as having been the builder of many notable buildings in the city, including the Wellwood Murray Memorial Library and the Pacific Building and many other private residences. However, this particular dwelling is not a particularly noteworthy example of products or projects built by Mr. Chamberlain, and there was no architect identified associated with the structure. So again, we did not find it eligible under this particular criteria. It was also not found under the criterias 6 or 7 relating to a significant entity or anything associated with prehistory. Beginning on page 5 and on to page 6 of your staff report, we did an analysis of integrity. Typically, if you don't have any criterion for which the property is potentially eligible, it is a moot point to go further and discuss the eligibility of integrity. However, we did analyze the integrity of the property, and we did not find anything about it which particularly was noteworthy or granted specific integrity findings for this property. So our conclusion is that the structure at 217 East Ocotillo is a modest frame and stucco dwelling from the 1930s, constructed and designed in a simplified Spanish colonial revival style. It does not represent a particularly noteworthy example from the period of its style, and therefore we do not believe that it possesses integrity or sufficient qualifications for it to be considered for further study to possibly recommend a designation of a Class 1 or Class 2 historic site. We're recommending that the board take no action and allow the applicant to proceed with the demolition. Mr. Sean Harris is here on behalf of the owner if you have any questions, and I'm available also to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lyon. And before we ask Mr. Harris to speak, are there any questions for the staff from the board? Does the board have any questions of the staff? Okay, so I'd like to welcome Mr. Sean Harris. You have 3 minutes if you would like to share anything more about the project for the board's consideration. Welcome.
Madam Chair and the board, we don't have any other comments or contributions. If you have any other questions, Milo or I can help answer any questions.
Okay, does the board have any further questions of Mr. Harris? Any other questions, anyone? Okay, so seeing no further questions, may I have a motion, please? Mr. Rose?
I just have one comment. Another really excellent and thoughtful presentation by the staff. Well done. Totally supported. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Would you like to make that motion, Mr. Rose?
I will. I move to vote on staff's findings to take no further action on this matter.
Okay, and we have a motion by Mr. Rose. Do we have a second by Mr. Miller? Okay, any further discussions? Any? Okay, seeing none, I will call for the question. All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Any opposed? Okay, so the motion passes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 0 with Mr. Nelson abstaining here. So we can call Mr. Nelson back. Welcome back, Mr. Nelson. Okay, let us proceed to agenda item number 4C. This is to review for potential redesignation of a Class 4 site to a Class 1 or 2 historic resource initiated by application by Don Gottfeld, owner, requesting approval to demolish the dwelling located at 1057 East Buena Vista Drive. So may we please have a staff report?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The dwelling that's under consideration was built in 1946. By virtue of its age, as I mentioned previously, it is a Class 4 site, and a full demolition requires action by the board to either take action to stay the demolition and initiate proceedings, or take no action and allow the demolition to proceed. The applicant has provided in his materials information regarding several modifications that have been made to the site, particularly apparently several that were made without building permits. So there's a considerable portion or portions of this particular dwelling that are illegal. They were not built with permits. In review of this particular site against the criteria in the Historic Preservation Ordinance, again, we were not able to find anything about this particular site based on the application materials and our own research in the city records to find that it does possess any historic significance relative to the city's criteria. This is outlined on page 4 of your staff report, in which we've analyzed it based on construction, whether there are any persons of significance, whether it represents a noteworthy period. This period in this case would be the post-World War II period, 1945 to 1969. The home has no known architect associated with it, and there was nothing that we saw relative to the builder that would have raised a question of possible significance. So we do not believe there is anything about this particular dwelling that would justify further consideration or moving forward with potential redesignation. So our recommendation at this time is to recommend that the board take no action and allow the processing of the demolition permit. The owner, Mr. Gottfeld, is here with us and can answer any other questions you may have. And of course, I am available to answer your questions. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any questions of the staff from the board? Any questions? Okay, so I'd like to invite Mr. Don Gottfeld to tell us, share anything that you would like about the project for the board's consideration. So if you'll unmute yourself and we welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have any other comments. Mr. Lyon did a wonderful job in covering everything, but I'm here for any additional questions.
Okay. Any further questions, board of the applicant? Any questions? Okay, seeing no further questions, we're going to ask for another motion. So motion, Mr. Nelson.
Yeah, not a question for the applicant, but rather a comment.
Oh, okay.
Regarding one of the occupants of the home, to let the public record reflect that one of the earliest owners of the home was a Mr. John Hollinger, who was a pillar of the Palm Springs community, and I'm reading from his obituary. He served on the Parks and Recreation Commission, and in the 1950s, he helped start the Palm Springs Little League. He was the founder of the Palm Springs Mounted Police Search and Rescue Team and the chairman of the parade and rodeo given by that organization. He was one of the first members of the local compadre stables and served on the Youth Center Board of Directors as president and board member for some 40 years. And he was also responsible for the construction of the present Palm Springs Youth Center YMCA, where the gymnasium is named in its honor. And there is a trail above the city, the Skyline Trail, that has been hiked hundreds of times by his own son, Andy Hollinger, who was a football coach and teacher at the local high school during the time which I went to high school in Palm Springs. So I think it's important that the record reflects that, because he was probably the person of the highest local significance associated with this address. And that concludes my comment. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Nelson, for adding that additional information, and good to have that for the record. So are there any other questions or comments before I ask for a motion? Okay, may I have a motion?
I would move to have the HSPB take no action and direct staff to administratively approve the demolition permits for this property.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second? Mr. Kaiser, you second the motion?
Yes.
Okay, is there any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll call for the question. All in favor of this motion, please say aye.
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 Okay, and any opposed? Okay, so the motion passes 6-0. Let us proceed to item 4D, which is the application by Charles and Patricia Stump, owners for the historic designation of the William Purcell residence located at 252 East Ocotillo Avenue. And it's the staff recommendation that we receive the report and direct staff to schedule site visits for us to visit the property and then schedule a public hearing to consider the application. So may I have a motion to that effect?
I move.
Okay, Mr. Rosenell makes a motion to receive the report and schedule visits and a public hearing. Is there a second? Mr. Rose, do you second?
Yes.
Okay, so are there any discussion? So seeing none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? So the motion passes 6-0. Let us proceed to agenda item 4E. This is a application by the city of Palm Springs for historic designation of the El Dumpo Adobe located at 2276 South Araby Drive and the Araby Rock Houses located at 2350, 2500, 2501, 2540, and 2550 South Araby Drive. So the staff recommendation is to receive the report. It's a big report and direct staff to schedule site visits and a public hearing to consider the application. So may I have a motion to that effect, please?
So moved.
Okay, Mr. Miller makes a motion.
Second.
And Mr. Nelson is second. Miller, Nelson. Okay. So any discussion about that? Lots of homework. Yes, Mr. Nelson.
Yes, I know some site visits have already been scheduled, and I personally was unable to visit El Dumpo Adobe located at 2276 South Araby Drive. So I'd just like to ask that that be rescheduled before we actually have that on our agenda again.
Okay, we'll work to.
Me too.
That. Okay, we'll work on that. Right, Mr. Lyon?
Yes, no one of the board members were able to visit that site. We had a little snafu with the property owner, made it unable for us to visit at that time. So we will try to get a site visit scheduled for you if it's possible.
Well, no wonder. My feelings were hurt, so that's good.
But you got to visit the big rock house across the street. It's great. Well, come and visit Araby. So, okay, so we are we squared away with that? Did I take a vote on that? I got so excited.
You need to take a vote.
I did. Okay, so that passed 6-0. Okay, let us proceed to discussions agenda 5A. And 5A is the annual work program. Mr. Lyons.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And I was scrambling here just a minute because in my packet, as I'm sitting here trying to support you, I didn't have this memo. So I'm going to be reading from my screen for a moment. So bear with me. You were provided with a memo, a staff memo dated October 6th, in which I summarized your tally of priorities for possible consideration for your work plan for the 21-22 fiscal year. The memo identified the top priorities as being the gas company building, the William Morton residence, fire station number 4, Elrod Simsarian building, and the Saks building. However, in this memo to which that I did send you, I identified that there were a couple of the properties that were recommended that are on the reservation and therefore not eligible for consideration by the board. And I also asked for you to consider the following, and I'll just read this for the public record so people understand what we're doing here. And I said, while it's entirely the board's decision on what it wishes to establish on its annual work plan, I recommend the Captor Design Tockwitz Creek Golf Clubhouse be selected rather than the Captor designed fire station number 4. Why? Because it is a more unique, seminal example of the work of Hugh Captor. It is more vulnerable to unsympathetic alterations, and it is less known by the public at large as a signature piece of work by this master architect. I also put forward my opinion that I do not believe the Elrod's association with the Simsarian building is sufficient for it to qualify as a historic site, and I would recommend that that be removed from further consideration. Taking into account those two suggestions, your top 5 priorities could be the gas company building, the Stephen Willard and Morton residence, the Captor Design Tockwitz Golf Course Clubhouse, the Saks building, and the courthouse building. That's where my recommendation is for you, and it also is sort of tied into the priorities that you put forth in your voting. So I turn it back over to you for further direction to us.
Okay. So is there discussion about this? Mr. Lyon did a lot of work and putting that all together and researching the properties for us. And thank you so very much for doing that. And so let's give some comments. Mr. Rose?
No, I just think that was a spectacular job, and it helped sort of separate and prioritize. And I would move to accept Mr. Lyon's recommendation.
Okay. So there's a motion. Is there a second to? Okay, Mr. Nelson is the second.
No.
No. Oh, I'm sorry. I jumped the gun. So you raised your hand. You want to make a comment?
I do, please.
Okay. All right.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that. I would have a question for staff. I was wondering, it's my understanding that the Palm Springs Modern Committee has been in touch with staff about one of the buildings on this list, which is the gas company building, and how the Modern Committee is concerned that there may be some danger perhaps to the site. And I was wondering if staff could elaborate on that discussion and the Modern Committee's concerns for us so that we're all aware of that.
Sure.
Thank you.
I was contacted by a representative of PS Modcom asking about the gas company building. The comment that I made to them as they were asking questions about the merits of having that as one of your work plan priorities around the notion that there is potential danger to it. You have a very important set of revisions that took place in the Historic Preservation Ordinance in 2019 and 2020. Those particular revisions included review procedures in the event that someone may wish to alter or demolish a class 3 or class 4 site. That criteria, that section of the ordinance, which provides a procedure and a stop point, if you will, in that kind of action, in staff's opinion, in my opinion, renders it unnecessary to worry about the potential danger, quote unquote, of a site being lost. If someone wishes to alter a building in the city of Palm Springs that is a Class 3 site, depending on the nature and the degree of alteration, is either reviewed by the HSPB or by myself as the city's historic preservation officer. In the case of a full scrape, those types of questions always come to the board on Class 3 and Class 4 sites. So my opinion was, consider the sites that really have historic merit and reduce your concern, and I don't want to say eliminate it because I know it's a authentic concern, but think about the fact that your ordinance has now been revised significantly and puts in place procedural safeguards that cause the potential for alterations that would be detrimental or otherwise to be considered either by staff or by the HSPB. And so if your notion is that the gas company building should be on your work plan because there's some risk of it being damaged or demolished, I think is an unnecessary reason to make it a priority. You should make it a priority if you believe that it is above and beyond possessing historic significance compared to any other site that you're thinking about in the city. And so that was the nature of that conversation.
Mr. Lyon, if I could just add relative to the gas company building, I have met with the property owner a couple of times discussing future plans for the building and for the site. We've also indicated to the property owner the fact that we would really encourage him to pursue designation of the building. In terms of his plans, he doesn't have any concrete ideas yet about what he wants to do, but he has discussed adding additional facilities to the site rather than modifying the existing gas company building. There is a portion of the parcel on which it's located, which is currently undeveloped. And so it does allow for future buildings to be located on the site with limited impact to the gas company building. So the property owner is aware of our interest in the building and certainly will take that into consideration in terms of any future plans for the property.
Mr. Nelson?
Yes, thank you, Ken and Flynn, for those clarifications. Extremely helpful, much appreciated. Another question for staff regarding this list. The second item on the list, the Morton home, known as Morton Botanical Garden, and the home of Stephen Willard and Chester Cactus Slim Morton. I know that many, many years ago, the HSPB had talked about putting this home on its book plan. And I don't remember if it was put on and then taken off, but there was a lot of discussion about it. And I do recall some discussion that there was some owner opposition back at that time. So I'm curious if city staff is aware of any further owner opposition.
I've not spoken with Mr. Morton recently, but I did speak with him a few years ago when the board had considered this on its work plan. And Mr. Morton was not opposed to designation at that time per se, but was concerned that he really, as much as my efforts to try to explain it to him, he felt a certain degree of apprehension and just wasn't sure that it was something that he wanted to have associated with his property at that time. So I respected his opinions at that time, and I appreciated his candor in sharing his concerns with us. So, but that's the extent to which we've had any outreach to the property owner.
Okay, great. Thanks for that clarification.
Thank you. So we do have a motion on the floor by Mr. Rose to accept the annual work program as described by Mr. Lyon. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Mr. Miller. So motion by Rose, second by Miller. Any further discussion? Yes, Mr. Lyon.
I just have a question based on Jade's Jade's questions.
Oh.
Are you okay with this order of priority, or do you want to jiggle it around? Is there any, do you want to think about that one further, or are you okay with this?
Or isn't there a vote on this?
No, you have a motion and a second, and now you have discussion.
Discussion.
Oh.
Yeah, I appreciate that question, Mr. Lyon. That's very thoughtful of you. I did have some concerns about Morton being second priority based on the owner's waffling or reluctance in the past. I do think it's extremely important. I did have a concern about the 850 North Palm Canyon, the LROD building being left off without doing a proper historic assessment report on that. And I would like to just put out there that if one of these falls away in the coming year, that we reconsider 850 North Palm Canyon or 350B Alola, which was the first home of Art Elrod, because he's extremely important and we have a lot of new information about him. There's a book now. We have a chair, Madam Chair, who is very familiar with Art Elrod and his work. So I think that he should be part of this work plan somehow. So I'm just making that suggestion if one of these falls off, that we look at one of those two properties. Thank you.
And Mr. Lyon, don't we review every year? We review and kind of reprioritize and based on new information. I mean, it's a constant living, changing program that can change. And it just gets us started, right?
And basically, because there is a good amount of activity happening coming in from property owners themselves, sometimes we're able to get through your work plan and sometimes we can't. So it's a point of starting. You're correct.
Yeah. Okay, Mr. Rosenau.
A question of staff, the 850 North Palm Canyon building where the Elrod offices were, is that part of the Las Palmas Business District that is out there?
It is within the Las Palmas Business Historic District. It's identified as a non-contributor.
No, okay. Thank you.
Very good. Good. Okay, good discussion. Any other comments before call for the vote? We have a motion and a second. So all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? Okay, so the motion passes 6-0.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for your hard work on that.
Well done.
So now it's 7:30-ish. And so we're proceeding to agenda item 5B, which is the Annual Preservation Matters Symposium. And in the interest of time, I will report quickly tonight, but invite members of our subcommittee to offer any additional comments if you would like. We've had two meetings recently, one on September 16th and another one on October 29. This was our subcommittee, and then we did invite a representative from some of the other organizations to participate in a discussion about suggested topics and tours to properties. And so we've been doing a lot of work and a lot of great ideas from everyone. We, invited, Historical Society rep, and as well as from the Modern Committee and the Historic Site Foundation, and received a lot of good impact and participation. So as soon as I get that list typed up of those recommended topics, I will be happy to share them with other board members so that we can proceed in making other plans. So at this point, Mr. Kaiser or Mr. Nelson, do you want to add anything to our report on what we're doing with the symposium? Mr. Kaiser, you're muted. You need to unmute.
Okay.
Thank you.
One of the things that we came up with, which would be a major change in the way that we're doing this, and I hope we can pull this off and it's really good, is that because it's a Saturday and Sunday, we were going to do the party event on Sunday evening rather than on the first evening, which will bring more energy into the second day. And then We're looking right now with finishing up with the Plaza Hotel, which would be extremely strong, and then move directly to our party. So people wouldn't be running back and forth, cutting the tour short if they wanted to get to the party. So that would be a fundamental change, and I hope we can make that happen.
Yeah, and that's the Plaza Theater as opposed to the Plaza Hotel.
Correct.
So yeah, no, that's an important change, and I appreciate your mentioning that. You know, we want people to celebrate the 2 days and then be together through the whole thing. And so that was a brilliant idea. So thanks for mentioning that. And Mr. Nelson, did you want to add anything more at this point?
No, thanks.
Okay, well, we'll continue with our planning and share that with you as soon as we can. So, now we're going to go on to board member comments. We've completed today's agenda, and so comments from the board. Mr. Nelson.
Very briefly, I just wanted to say how heartwarming it was to see so many members of our community participate tonight to speak on a certain issue. And I would like to thank all of them for showing up and taking time out of the evening and their dinner to be with us and to give their sentiments.
Thank you. Any other board member comments? Mr. Rose.
It just was, as Mr. Lyon said, it was certainly a full email this week.
Wow. Yes, lots of homework, lots of homework, lots of reading.
Lots of comments.
Yes. But wonderful.
Yep.
So does the staff have any comments that you would like to make?
I just have a couple of pieces of information to share with you.
Okay.
Back in January, the city council designated the Racket Club as a Class 2 historic site, and it required the applicant to provide a demolition plan of the non-designated parcels or buildings on the parcel in order to eliminate blight. We received that demolition plan from them yesterday, and it includes a proposal to demolish the Farrell residence, the 2-story apartment building in the northwest corner of the site, and there was one of the bungalows that burned recently and was completely destroyed about a month ago. Those 3 buildings are in their demolition plan, which will be submitted to the city council on consent for their approval. The second thing I want to mention is, and I see Gary Johns is here in the audience, hope all of you have had a chance to go down and visit the city's new downtown park. The Palm Springs Preservation Foundation and myself and former Mayor Will Kleindienst were involved in putting together a very informative historic marker at the site. I want to thank the Palm Springs Preservation Foundation and Gary Johns for helping facilitate that. That marker is really tells a wonderful story about the Desert Inn and Nellie Kaufman. There have been a couple of other historic markers that have been placed around that area that also recognize some other buildings and things that were on that site, which were lost or demolished when the Desert Fashion Plaza was constructed. So there's a new historic marker over by the Hyatt, and there's a new historic marker near the Blaze Pizza store, as well as the one that's at the city park. So wanted to just make you aware of that. Also, we do have an application that has come in from the Bank of America on the City National Bank building at the south end of downtown.
Cool.
And I want to report that very exciting find. You may recall a few years ago, they did a repaint on the building. I'm embarrassed to say I was involved with finding that color that was the wrong color. But remarkably, they removed a plate that was somewhere on that exterior of the building and found the original building color, which is very exciting. And of course, I asked for just a very simple little color swatch so I can share it.
Oh.
That's the little color swatch. So I'm really excited about that. Most of the work that will be done in the building is relatively minor. So most of it I will be processing at staff level, but there will be a new screen around the ATM machine that I want to share with you that I think is that's a very good improvement over the one that's there. So very exciting news about the City National Bank building. That's it for what my feeble brain can remember. It's late right now. Let's close this out. I appreciate all of your work. I'm especially appreciative of your willingness to, take on all of this reading. I know I filled your email inbox in the last few days with all the public comment, but that's part of the public process, and we really appreciate all of your efforts that you so diligently and conscientiously provide to the community and to the city. There was one other thing, boy. I'm sorry, it'll come to me later in the minute we probably close off the meeting, I'll remember, but that's it for now. Thank you all very much.
And thank you, Mr. Lyon. Mr. Nelson?
Yeah, just in response to the things that staff mentioned regarding the racket club and those buildings being demolished, will a certificate of appropriateness come before the HSPB for those, or is that not necessary?
No, that's not necessary. In this case, it was something that was determined by the city council as a condition of approval of the site.
Okay, and the second item was that new marker that's at the downtown park. I've seen it, it's really amazing. Can I ask who paid for that? Where did the money come for that?
The money came from the Palm Springs Preservation Foundation, and most of the incredible content of that marker is the credit of Will Klein Deeds.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. So are we all squared away with comments and questions? So this Historic Site Preservation Board will adjourn to the meeting of Tuesday, December 7th at 5:30 p.m. So I'd like to thank everyone for their participation today, and it's 7:37. So thank you very much. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Oops, Mr. Kaiser.
No, we were waving goodbye.
Oh, you're waving goodbye. No more. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.